A slight amendment to the title of the paper. This probably won't surprise you. It is Ralph Bunche, UN Trusteeship and Howard University's Conference on Trust and Non-Self-Governing Territories, 1947. I'm going to do two things. I've been grappling with this material for, it seems like, years. I was glad to hear that.
It's not as bad as you said.
I don't know. And so what I think I know what I want to say in this paper. I haven't gotten it all in words yet, but I'm going to do two things. The first is a bit of a description of what the Howard School of International Affairs was like. I actually see it as having two faces. There's the face here on the Hill in the Academy, and then there's the face of it where people are actually implementing these ideas in the real world. And hence I've put together two events that were happening almost simultaneously and that come together here on Howard's campus related to trusteeship. And then I'm going to just have some thumbnail statements about what I see to be the components of something that if one wants to call it a School of International Affairs, what I see as being the major components. On April 8, 1947, 1 week after the first meeting of the United Nations Trusteeship Council, Professor E. Franklin Frazier opened the 10th Annual Conference of Howard University's Division of Social Sciences, 10th Annual. A star-studded roster of academics, politicians, policy activists, government functionaries, and diplomats convened to address the theme, Trust and Non-Self-Governing Territories. That's trusteeship territories and then non-self-governing territories or colonies. Over a 2-day period, the university's Rankin Memorial Chapel served as a site for spirited discussions and analyses of the newly established UN agency and the role that it might ultimately play in the decolonization of Africa. Eleanor Roosevelt gave the opening keynote. W.E.B. Du Bois delivered the closing address. Papers by Howard University historian Rayford Logan, Max Jurgen of the Council on African Affairs, George Middleton, First Secretary of the British Embassy, and Dr. W.A. Timmerman, a government functionary from the Union of South Africa, rounded out the program. Presiding over the fact-filled sessions were Howard's president, Mordecai Johnson, the dean of the graduate school, Dr. Charles H. Thompson, as well as the department heads of sociology and history. That would be Frazier and Logan. Howard's diplomatic historian, Merz Tate, / political scientist, Merz Tate, edited the papers which Howard University Press published a year later. Now get this, approximately 2,100 people attended this event. So that gives you a sense of what the Howard School was about, in a sense. That's a part of it. The caliber of the speakers, the hands-on involvement of the university's senior administrators, the public appeal of the event, all signified the convening power of the institution that had come to be known as the capstone of black higher education. While a consideration of racial factors was implicit in almost every intervention, by no measure was this Howard Conference an exercise in groupthink. To the contrary, the design of the format encouraged the articulation of contending views. 3 weeks later, Ralph Bunche, head of the UN Secretariat's Trusteeship Division, traveled to Howard to spell out the anti-colonial rationale for advancing new international norms and to put a practical face on issues raised at the Howard Conference. Tellingly, he titled his address, "The United Nations and the Colonial Problem," and remarks that drew particular attention to the machinery that was being developed to breathe life into the trusteeship system. Bunche detailed the aims of the project as follows, quote, "It calls specifically for the promotion of the advancement of the inhabitants, their development towards self-government or independence, and for the encouragement of respect for human rights, and freedom without discrimination. Specific provision is made for the right of petition, oral as well as written, and such petitions may come from any source, whether in or outside the trust territories. Moreover, they may be submitted directly to the United Nations and need not be conveyed through the administering authorities. The new system also provides for periodic visits by the United Nations to the trust territories for purposes of on-the-spot inspection. Now, I've actually read the excellent proceedings of the conference, as well as the text of Bunch's speech, and I actually plan to use them for students to read. But I was just thinking, imagine what it would be like to be a student in a period of less than a month, to have those people come and say what they said at this historic moment in history. The very fact that these things have sort of fallen by the wayside and we don't know about them says something about higher education. But I also think it says something about a mission that Howard ought to see itself as duty-bound to pick up and do right by. Now, Bunch was a full professor on leave from Howard with a penchant for social engineering. The Trusteeship Council offered him a platform that combined academic study and the possibility for action. One of his former staff members would later recall that the small group in Bunch's trusteeship division felt that they were embarking on an historic mission to bring better conditions and eventual independence to Africans. As a senior official in charge of his own division, Bunch had the ear of the Secretary General and was in an unprecedented position to advance the cause of dependent peoples. Appointment of the British anti-colonial advocate Wilfred Benson as director of the Division of Non-Self-Governing Territories gave him an ally. Working together, they both took steps to establish an active role for the Secretariat in the area of trusteeship and decolonization. The trusteeship staff, this is Bunch's staff, moved quickly to prepare questionnaires, propose rules for the handling of petitions, and to suggest procedures for examining annual reports that would be submitted by the trust territories' administering authorities. Early in his academic career, the young scholar had railed against the forces at work in an international capitalist society which breeds such horrors as imperialism. Now, and he essentially said that imperialism was really working to deter the international community from protecting the interests of weak states or dependent peoples. Now, in his new role, he somehow thought that the world had changed enough, that the right people were in the right places, that they would be able to move on an agenda that would go beyond even the charter of the UN, which very narrowly sort of gave the Trusteeship Council responsibility for a handful of states that had been mandates, but the majority of the colonies in the world were left untouched. He clearly had a notion that if he could do this right, trusteeship and its principles would be extended to the broader categories of colonies worldwide. Well, it didn't quite work that way. So Bunch was moving very quickly to try to get things in place, and then one of the things that happens is that the South African government says that they have no intention of putting Southwest Africa under the mandate, under the trusteeship system. They were making plans to move ahead to have the first UN visiting mission to East Africa. Tanganyika was the first country. And while that was happening, all of a sudden, Bunch learns that he is being temporarily assigned to the UN Special Committee on Palestine. This took him away from the day-to-day involvement in the work of the trusteeship council. And he lost control of it. You know how there's a good ending to the story. He ended up winning a Nobel Prize. But what he was planning or hoping he would be able to do, the council lumbered along, but certainly not in the way in which he had envisaged. Now let me just move quickly to say something about how I see the Howard School. First of all, in my view, and I'll make this argument, I see the Howard School of International Affairs as a critique of Wilsonian liberal internationalism. Chew on that. Secondly, we had a network of scholars, and that network was very visible in that conference that I described at the very beginning. It was much broader than a network of people who were studying race and imperialism. It was a network of international scholars whose work addressed race, imperialism, nationalism. They were involved in debunking social Darwinism, problematizing white supremacy. But they were also working on a range of other issues, including even with Tate security studies. Decolonization was an issue that they put on their academic agenda. And that was a very important part of this network of scholars. They were drawn to policy-oriented and policy-relevant research, often interdisciplinary. And one can look at work ranging from Rayford Logan's article where he examines the voting behavior on the Versailles Treaty, to Ralph Bunche's interdisciplinary work where he talks about circumcision ceremony in Kikuyu and relates that to nationalism. And Merce Tate, I learned today, was a political scientist, did history, but she also did extensive work in geography. So these were people who brought a range of disciplinary skills to subjects. There was a journal. The journal was the Journal of Negro Education. I found this out because Ralph Bunche, I tried to do an intellectual biography about Ralph Bunche, but he actually published very few scholarly pieces. 2 were in the Journal of Negro Education, and 2 are in the Journal of Negro History. So when I'm reading the Journal of Negro Education, I'm trying to figure out why are these 2 here. I stumble across the fact that it's a journal that is full of book reviews. And as part of the mission of the journal, it was to bring to the attention of teachers of Negro children some of the best work on things they should be reading. And these book reviews did very brief blurbs of books. Dorothy Porter did a fabulous article in which she pulled together 25 years of book reviews, which I was then able to analyze to see. There are books reviewed on, and you also see the Howard School network there. Merce Tate does the reviews on Asia. Logan does the Caribbean. Bunche on Africa. Eric Lincoln about Caribbean. Mercer Cook is looking at things in French. And so it's this remarkable journal that has book reviews. It's an outlet for people who can't sometimes get their work published, which Bunche was always wringing his hands about that. And they also did features on certain international policy documents. And so I was really excited. I was here in this building in the library when I realized that there's a journal for this. And that's when I thought there's actually something going on here. Very quickly, let me finish up an annual conference. I read you that little brief on the 10th annual conference of the Howard unit, the Social Sciences Division. And about 3 or 4 of their first 10 years, they did conferences on international issues. And finally, I will say that there are 2 white scholars whose intellectual trajectories interact in interesting ways with the Howard School. Professor Vitalis talks about Raymond Leslie Buell. I have a rather a different read of what he was all about, but he was clearly very central to the scholarship, people who were working on international affairs. He came to Howard frequently, gave talks to students. He shared, he read the work of people who were working here, and he actually suggested Bunch's dissertation topic, helped him get research clearance, worked with him on the research design. And I came to the idea that there was something going on when I got a copy of Bunch's dissertation, and he does not acknowledge or thank Leslie Buell. If you have read as many letters as I read that were exchanged between Bunch and Buell, it just jumps out at you. So Buell is one, and Rupert Emerson is the other. What happens is Buell taught at Harvard for 5 years with the comparative colonial administration model. Rupert Emerson showed up in 1930. Bunch actually started his dissertation with Buell's paradigm and ends it with Emerson's. When I was at Harvard during spring break, going through the catalogs, trying to figure out what was going on class-wide in terms of courses. I talked to Martin Kilson. Martin Kilson did his dissertation on trusteeship under Rupert Emerson, and Ralph Bunch arranged for Kilson to have a carol in the trusteeship division of the UN while he was writing his dissertation. And talking with Kilson, there are 3 people in this genealogy coming from Rupert Emerson. It starts with Bunch, Merce Tate, and Martin Kilson. And I will end. Thank you.